Before cities, before writing, before farming, someone got drunk. And it may have changed the course of human civilization forever. The story of alcohol is older than you think. Much older. We tend to think of alcohol as something humans invented, a product of civilization. But the truth is stranger. Alcohol existed long before any human ever touched it. Ripe fruit falls. Yeast in the air lands on it. Sugar turns to ethanol. Nature makes alcohol on its own. And animals figured that out way before we did. There are monkeys in the Caribbean that actively seek out fermented fruit and get visibly intoxicated. Elephants do it. Pen-tailed tree shrews drink fermented nectar every single night, up to the equivalent of 9 glasses of wine. So the question isn't really when did humans discover alcohol? The question is, when did we start doing it on purpose? And that is where things get genuinely unsettling, because the answer reaches back further than almost anyone expected. Let's start with the genetics. In 2014, a team of researchers published a study on a specific enzyme in our bodies, ADH4. This enzyme is what breaks down ethanol, alcohol, in your body. Without it, you'd get violently ill from even tiny amounts. And here's the thing. About 10 million years ago, our ancestors developed a mutation in ADH4 that made it 40 times more effective at processing alcohol. 10 million years ago. That's before Homo sapiens, before Neanderthals, before almost everything we recognize as human. Scientists think this happened because our ancestors were transitioning from tree living to ground living. And the fruit on the ground was often fermented. The ones who could process that alcohol without getting sick had access to more food. They survived better. They passed on the mutation. So, in a very real sense, the ability to handle alcohol is baked into human biology. It's not a vice we developed, it's a survival trait. But when did we actually start brewing it deliberately? When did someone sit down and think, I want more of this feeling? The oldest confirmed evidence of intentional alcohol production comes from a cave in Israel, Rakafet Cave. Around 13,000 years ago, a group called the Natufians used stone mortars to brew a beer-like fermented drink from wheat, barley, and plant fibers. This wasn't an accident. The residue analysis showed deliberate multi-stage processing. They were following a recipe 13,000 years ago. That predates agriculture. They were brewing before they were farming. And this discovery actually reignited a very old debate. Which came first, bread or beer? For a long time, we assumed farming came first. Humans settled down to grow grain, then figured out fermentation as a side effect. But some researchers now argue the opposite, that the desire for alcohol might have actually motivated early humans to start farming in the first place. Think about that. The entire agricultural revolution, possibly kick-started by the desire to brew more beer. It's called the beer before bread hypothesis, and while it's still debated, the evidence keeps piling up. Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, the oldest known monumental structure built by humans, dating to around 12,000 years ago. Archaeologists found massive stone vats at the site, large enough to hold 160 liters of liquid. Chemical analysis, fermented grain residue. These weren't small ritual cups. These were industrial-scale brewing vessels at the oldest temple on Earth, which raises a deeply strange possibility that religion and alcohol may have been partners from the very beginning of human spirituality. Now, let's jump forward a bit, because ancient China has something to say here as well. In 2004, a jar excavated from a Neolithic site called Jiahu revealed chemical traces of the oldest known mixed fermented drink: rice, honey, hawthorn fruit, and grapes, fermented together, dating to around 7,000 BCE. That's 9,000 years ago. Patrick McGovern, the biomolecular archaeologist who analyzed the jar, calls it the world's oldest cocktail. 9,000 years ago, someone in China was mixing rice wine with honey mead and wild fruit. Experimenting. Crafting. This wasn't primitive. This was craft brewing. This was intentional flavor development. Meanwhile, in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, beer was so fundamental that it was woven into law. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal texts in existence, had specific laws governing taverns and beer cellars. If a tavern keeper watered down their beer and got caught, the punishment was death by drowning. They took their beer seriously, dead serious. Mesopotamian workers, laborers building temples and ziggurats, were paid partly in beer. It was currency, it was calories, it was community. The oldest known written recipe in human history is for beer. A 4,000-year-old Sumerian poem dedicated to Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing. It describes the process step by step. Soaking grain, making bread, crumbling the bread into water, letting it ferment. People have actually brewed beer using this recipe in modern times. It works. It tastes earthy and sweet and strange. Ancient Egypt had a similar relationship with beer. Workers who built the pyramids were rationed beer daily, about 4 to 5 liters per day per worker, which sounds excessive. But their beer was thick and low alcohol, closer to liquid bread than what we drink today. It was nutrition. It was hydration. The Nile water was often unsafe. Beer was safer because the brewing process killed pathogens. This is one of the more overlooked reasons alcohol spread so rapidly through ancient civilizations. It was cleaner than water. In Europe, the same pattern. Ancient Greeks drank wine mixed with water. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric. Wine was sacred to Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and chaos. Ritual drinking was literally a religious practice. In Rome, wine was even more democratic. Soldiers, slaves, senators all received wine rations. It crossed every class boundary. But let's go even deeper, because there's evidence that pushes intentional alcohol use back much further than 13,000 years. In 2021, researchers found evidence that humans may have produced fermented beverages as far back as 100,000 years ago. This is based on analysis of stone tools in South Africa, residues suggesting the processing of starchy plant material in ways consistent with fermentation. 100,000 years. That means fully anatomically modern humans may have been fermenting things before they left Africa, before they painted caves, before they crossed continents, before any of the things we call civilization. They may have been brewing. Now, why does this matter? Why does it matter when ancient humans started drinking alcohol? Because alcohol didn't just affect individual brains. It may have shaped how human societies were built. Communal drinking creates bonding. It lowers social barriers. It builds trust between strangers, which is exactly what you need to build large cooperative societies. Some anthropologists believe that shared drinking rituals were one of the earliest mechanisms for diplomacy between rival groups. You invite your enemy to drink. You share the cup. You're both vulnerable. That shared vulnerability builds connection, even trust. There's even a theory that alcohol may have played a role in the development of language itself, by loosening inhibitions and encouraging vocalization. That's speculative, but it's not as absurd as it sounds. Inhibition suppression has real social and linguistic consequences. Then there's the spiritual angle. Nearly every ancient culture tied alcohol to the divine, to ritual, to altered states of consciousness. In ancient Peru, chicha, a fermented corn drink, was central to Incan ceremonies. In India, soma, a ritualistic brew of unknown composition, is described in the Vedas. These weren't just parties. The intoxication was considered a form of contact with the divine, a thinning of the veil between worlds. There's something almost haunting about that idea, that the same chemical reaction happening in your brain after a glass of wine tonight is the same one ancient priests used to speak to their gods. Now let's talk about something that often gets left out of this conversation, the dark side. Because alcohol didn't just build things. Ancient records show it also destroyed them. Ancient Chinese texts from as far back as 1000 BCE describe the fall of dynasties attributed to rulers consumed by drink. Alexander the Great, history's most successful military commander, is believed to have contributed to his own death through chronic heavy drinking. Ancient Egypt had instructions inscribed in tombs warning young people about the dangers of taverns and excessive beer. The duality of alcohol, builder and destroyer, sacred and profane, is not modern. It is ancient. It is fundamental. So where does this leave us? Let's stack the timeline, because it's remarkable when you see it laid out. 10 million years ago, our ancestors evolved the ability to metabolize alcohol as a survival mechanism. Possibly 100,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans may have begun deliberately fermenting plant material in southern Africa. 13,000 years ago, confirmed intentional brewing by the Natufians, predating agriculture entirely. 12,000 years ago, mass brewing at Göbekli Tepe inside a religious monument, at the dawn of organized human spirituality. 9,000 years ago, sophisticated mixed ingredient brewing in China. Flavors, craft, intention. 4,000 years ago, written beer recipes, legal codes for taverns, workers paid in alcohol, alcohol embedded in civilization's operating system, and then the present, where you can walk into any corner store and buy what took ancient humans millennia to develop. There's a line of continuity stretching from a fermenting pile of fruit on the African savanna 10 million years ago to the glass in your hand tonight. That line runs through a Natufian cave, through Göbekli Tepe, through the pyramids, through Dionysus and Ninkasi and Alexander the Great. We didn't invent alcohol. We didn't even discover it. We evolved alongside it, and then we made it ours. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. Not that ancient humans drank, but that the drive to alter consciousness, to commune, to feel something different, is not a weakness we developed. It may be one of the oldest impulses we carry. Older than civilization, older than farming, maybe older than memory itself. The next time you open a bottle, remember, you're not doing something casual. You're participating in a 10 million year old tradition, one that helped build cities, inspired gods, ended empires, and kept a species alive long enough to wonder where it all started. When did ancient humans start drinking alcohol? The honest answer is, we never really stopped. If this sits with you, there's a lot more where that came from.